still waiting for, I think, 4 or 5 people to log in, but we are still a few minutes early. So
yeah, we're quite early, aren't we?
So how have you been doing for lockdown?
Well, it's just been quite a long time, hasn't it, really?
Never ending, isn't it, really?
But no, I think we're coming out slightly. I mean, because my main thing is theatre, there's been nothing happening at all, really. But
No.
but my one show which I direct and which I adapted ages ago and which has kept on going, that is coming back. So I was I was actually auditioning people last week, and which meant traveling from Wimbledon, where I am, to Wembley, which seemed like a big adventure suddenly.
Yeah. Yeah. I must say, I do miss the theatre. I always like to go up to the West End a few times a year and see as many shows as possible. So I think, like a lot of people, had a few shows booked just before the lockdown hit last March, and
Yeah,
things that I'll be very keen to get back.
yeah.
I don't know whether people.
Some of them are coming back.
Yeah.
I think a few will bite the dust. I think some will not come back, but
Yeah.
But the big ones are all planning. I think there are dates up for the big musicals and so on. But some of the plays, I think it will be quite difficult for them to reassemble everybody.
Oh yeah, people got different work commitments and things like that. I did hear that the Phantom Yacht is coming back, but they've slashed their orchestra, I think, by 50%. I don't know whether that is to do with COVID or whether it's budget or.
No, well, there's a big controversy about that within the industry. I think it's a bit. I think it is a bit naughty. I mean, I can see why he's done it, but they're having a brand new company. Right. So all those people who were in the show when the lockdown came, I think might have assumed that they would be invited back.
Yeah.
But they haven't, including this poor man who's been in the show for 30 years. There's just one man, who's Philip Griffiths, who has been in it for 30 years, played several different parts, I think. Yeah. But he's very upset that he hasn't been invited back. No, I think it's a tricky one because all their contracts were ended when the lockdown came. That was what had to happen. They had to be paid off. So legally, they've got no comeback at all. They can't say, no, that was mine. But at the same time, on a human level, it's tricky.
Oh yeah, definitely. And also from the theatre goer's point of view, you're getting less for your money if the cast is less experienced. If the orchestra.
Well, certainly orchestra-wise, I mean, I think people can tell when you have synthesizers and electronic keyboards rather than the real thing. And originally they had 27 in the orchestra, which was the biggest in London. And they're going down to 14, I think, which and I think there was one woman who played the harp and she'd been in it since the beginning, and they got rid of her. So,
yeah,
it's sad, but there we are.
I mean, I've always wanted to go and see Phantom in the West End, and I've always sort of been distracted by other shows, so I've never got around to it.
Yeah.
But the fact they made these changes, I don't think I want to go until they change it back, really. And I think maybe if people feel the same way, but it's just a shame.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll still be, it'll still be all right, still be good. But I do think that people who knew the original will probably be just disappointed.
Oh yeah. And it's I mean, obviously, the acting and arts profession has always been a precarious career at the best of times, but obviously lockdown has really, really thrown it into disarray. So
yeah,
hopefully it'll get back on its feet. I mean, I think the one good thing about things like Zoom, there has been some virtual plays and table reads and that sort of thing. I don't know if you've sort of seen any of those or contributed to anything like that over lockdown.
No, well, there's been a lot going on. I mean, people have been doing a lot of things, and I think they've, it's admirable but it isn't a substitute for the real thing. And there are there's a company in America who do children's theatre, and they've got so excited about the online stuff and realizing that they can reach more people, that they're on the verge, I think, of becoming more like a film company. But I would still say that it's not the same experience, whether it be for adults or children. I think the communal experience in a theatre is very different from watching on a screen.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be in a cinema even, I mean, but certainly not watching on a computer screen or a television screen. I don't think you get the same involvement. It's not so much of an event either. I mean, the fact that people have had to travel to get there and maybe, have a meal and they're meeting friends and so on, it becomes an event in their lives. It's not quite the same when you just turn on the telly, as it were.
Oh, no, absolutely. Like you say, it's an interesting format, the virtual, and in some respects, some of the till reads feel almost more intimate than, say, if you were sitting in the dress circle. So maybe some of these things will keep going because not everybody can get to a theatre. So maybe there's a valid place for virtual things. But as you say, you can't beat the live.
No, but it's an alternative in an extremity, as it were. It's not something you'd want to do all the time.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think the old Vic have done some very good.
Yes, I mean, they've been very inventive and filmed it on the stage, but with different camera angles and so on. And no, I think that's good. But it's still, in a way, you're looking at a television play. I don't care what people say, really. It's, some people say, oh, it's better because you can see from different angles that you couldn't see if you were in the theatre. Yeah, fair enough, but it is a different experience, and that in the theatre you can look where you want to look, whereas the director of a television program, he can tell you where to look, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a different medium, really.
Do you have a show you're really looking forward to go and see? Have you got some tickets or something already, or?
No, no, I'm sure I will, but no, there are quite a few plays that I haven't seen. Many plays I haven't seen, but no, I haven't actually booked ahead for anything. But I'm glad that people are booking for my show. I'm very grateful to them for doing that. We're meant to open again on July the 12th. This is The Tiger Who Came to Tea. You can see my tiger up in the background there.
Oh, yes.
And we've been doing it for 12 years. I think this is the 13th year we've been doing it. And so it'll be nice to get back to it. I never get bored with it. And the audiences are very young and they keep on coming. Every 5 years we have a completely different audience because they're all aged about 2, 3, 4, something like that. But no, it's nice.
Good. Is that going to be in Wimbledon or the West End, or?
That's in the West End. That's at the Haymarket, which is the most beautiful theatre in London. I mean, we're very lucky. We were there a couple of years ago, and we're back there, and it's absolutely lovely there.
Yeah, I've been to the Haymarket a few times, and yeah, it's lovely. So many of the West End theatres are so. You have something to look at before the show, and it's obviously part of the atmosphere, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
And unless, of course, you're a lady and you've got to deal with the toilets and these. So I'm just trying to see. I think we're almost on.
Good.
That's fine. Okay, I think we're pretty much ready to go. Okay. Just seeing who's on the list. Yeah, I think we're fine. I did mention to Raymond Austin, who obviously directed your episode, that we were doing this evening.
Yeah.
So he is going to see if he can join in the audience perhaps a bit later, and maybe, who knows, might be a sort of safer.
Oh, lovely.
So, just depends on whether he can make it or not. So, but he is aware of the event, and in either case, I'll send him the video recording afterwards, so you can he can see it. It's worth noting that we have a lady called Renee Glynn join us this evening, as she worked on the New Avengers as the script supervisor, although she didn't do your particular episode, but she did work on Aces High. But again, it may not be somebody that you.
What did she do again?
She was the script supervisor or the continuity.
All right. Yeah.
We call them. So.
Lovely.
Renee Glynn's with us, and we have a few other various people. One of which I should mention is Elaine Spooner, who is the daughter of Dennis Spooner, who co-wrote this episode. So. All
right. Great.
Watching with us as well. So. So it should be good. So it should be a pretty good evening, I think. So. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Okay, so I'm just going to say to everybody, well, welcome everybody to this watch along for the New Avengers three-handed game. We're delighted to be joined by Mr. David Wood, one of the special guest stars for this episode. For those of you who don't know, I'll just go through a few of David's career highlights. Credits include The Vamp opposite Shelly Winters, If opposite Malcolm McDowell, Aces High opposite Malcolm McDowell again, and also Christopher Plummer. North Sea Hijack, which also starred Roger Moore. Mr. David Wood is also a highly regarded and acclaimed children's author and also playwright. And in 2017, David won the J.M. Barrie Award, which is a lifetime achievement for children's literature. And in 2004, we awarded an OBE for services to children's literature. So quite an impressive and multi-faceted career. Is there anything you want to add to that, David? Any highlights that I haven't mentioned?
No, you've said quite enough. No, thank you very much. Very nice introduction, and good evening to everybody.
Lovely to have you with us, David. So I'm just going to see, we might have had a few welcome messages. I'll just read those out. So Darren and Ruth have said, thank you so much for hosting these, Philip. They're always awesome. Cheers. Oh, thank you very much. Annette said, hello everyone, looking forward to another entertaining evening. Annette says from Doncaster, and Darren and Ruth said, well, they're watching from North Carolina in the USA. So I think we've also got people from the Netherlands as well, so quite an eclectic a mix. Good evening all from Netherlands, says Jan. Hello gentlemen, says Simon. So I think that's all the hellos. Okay, that's fine. We have a few questions coming as well, but I'll save those until we get started. So everyone's got the episode to hand. We've got the DVD version out. So we're going to pause it. So if you press play on when you start the episode, it comes up with the Optimum Classic and then some film logos. So if we just let those go by for a moment, and then we'll pause it on the first frame of the episode. So I'll just let people have a few moments to do that, and then we can all press play at the same time. So I'll just get into my bit. So it's just like the Studio Canal logo.
Go through to the beginning of the yeah, you're sort of there.
So it should be a picture of the sea that everybody's pausing on. It's actually the first shot of the episode.
Yeah.
No.
Everyone just wants to take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll get started.
I've got a picture of the sea.
Oh, right, picture of the sea. Picture of the sea coming up.
Okay. You on the right place, David?
Yeah, we're very nearly there.
Okay, lovely.
We've just seen all the clouds.
Yeah.
Here's the sea. Yeah, we're there.
Perfect. The nice thing about New Avengers is it's only been released once, so everybody's kind of got the same set, whereas some things you've got a whole manner of different releases available. So hopefully everybody's ready. If anybody's having problems, just say so in the chat and we'll hold it for a few more moments. If not, we'll begin in 30 seconds or so. Yeah, I think everybody's okay. So I'll just do a quick countdown from 5, and then we'll all press play. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, play. Okay. So David, has it been quite a long time since you've seen this episode?
Well, I had I cheated and had a quick look a couple of days ago. I mean, there are certain aspects of it that I remember very, very vividly. Being kicked backwards into the orchestra pit of Wimbledon Theatre was quite an experience. But I'd forgotten that my brain was going to be replaced by the villain's brain.
Yeah.
But then I remembered. I mean, I remembered my funny little tap walk, and I couldn't remember quite why I did it, but I know that now.
Yeah, it's quite a brutal thing for your character to go through being killed and replaced with somebody else's mind. It's I think the Avengers,
well, it was obviously it worked 95%, but there were just the two things, weren't there? There was the slight stutter or difficulty with saying his P's, which or that was actually he had that anyway, but the remnant of the tap dancer was still lingering, and he couldn't quite get rid of. But that was great fun, really, because I wasn't a tap dancer, and the fact that when I was offered the part, I was told that it was because of my tap dancing abilities, which I had to say, well, no, actually, I have had a few lessons, but I'm not a tap dancer. And we were on holiday in Cornwall at the time, and they said, well, maybe you'd speak to the director. And we didn't have a phone in my in-laws' house in Cornwall, so it was all arranged. I'd go to a telephone box in Coverack, overlooking the sea, and sure enough, the phone rang, and it was Ray Austin, the director, who asked a few questions, and I admitted, that I couldn't do tap dancing very well. So he said, well, just put the phone down, the receiver, lower it down towards the floor, and just do a few steps. And so I did, and very kindly he said, oh yes, we can make that work, that'll be all right. And later on, I discovered that they thought I was a tap dancer because I was in the musical Jeeves, and which I was. But also in that musical was an actor called Terry Wood, and Terry Wood was indeed a tap dancer. So I thought, well, they've got me muddled up. So imagine my surprise when I arrived on the set one day, and there was Terry. He was in it too, and indeed he had to do a little bit of tap dancing, and you'll obviously see him later on. Very lovely big guy who was very light on his feet. And so it all worked out rather well in the end.
They did in fact want you both, but obviously.
So, yes, I don't know whether they had thought I was him or he was. I've no idea how it all happened, but we both were employed. They had two Woods in the cast. Here we are, going into the stage door of Wimbledon Theatre on my set, and that is me actually doing it. It doesn't look too bad, but that's thanks to Ray, really. We're coming up to the moment where I'm hit.
Yes.
And we go into the titles. That's quite exciting. Here we come. Boom.
I always thought that was rather fabulous, the way they did that. I thought that was.
Yes, and my long blonde hair, which I haven't got that much of left anymore. But it was, how long ago was it? It was about 45 years ago, I think, we did this.
This would have been filmed probably late 76, so getting close to...
yeah, it is 45 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, I remember it very well. I mean, the lovely thing was that we were actually living in Wimbledon at the time. Well, I am speaking from Wimbledon now. I still live in Wimbledon. And when the news came through that we were filming at Wimbledon Theatre, that was very nice. I could walk to work, and I knew the theatre quite well. And not long after, I was put on the board of Wimbledon Theatre, and I was on the board for some years. So it was lovely. Yes, look at that very dramatic fall there.
Did you get any lessons in tap dancing? Did you?
Well, no, the story was that I suppose within a year before this came up, I was in a play in the West End at the Criterion Theatre called After Haggerty, and we did 8 performances a week, including a matinee on the Wednesday or the Thursday, and it meant being up in town, and there was always this gap between the matinee and the evening show, and I thought I ought to do something. And at the time they were casting Ken Russell's film of The Boyfriend, and tap dancing was suddenly quite the thing. Not only that, No No Nanette, the American musical, was on at Drury Lane, and that needed tap dancers. So I thought maybe that would be a good thing to try to do. So I had lessons, but didn't do very well. You used to start off as a beginner over by the window, and as you progressed, as the weeks went by, I just went once a week, you go towards the middle of the room, and then as you got even better, you'd get towards the door, and then you go out the door and into the intermediate class. Well, I never left the window. I was up by the window this whole time. So I really can't say that I got very good, but there was just this one step which I could do. Now, of course, the stage door of Wimbledon Theatre looks nothing like that anymore. There was a big refurbishment, and that little passageway disappeared, but that was a real dressing room in the theatre. We did film it there. And the obviously on the stage, and this going out that passageway, that was all there, but no longer. Yes, we must have been there a couple of days, I suppose, shooting.
Oh, we've just been joined by Raymond Austin, has just logged on, and I think he just wants to come along and just say hello, if that's okay. So
yes, no, I'd love to see Ray. I haven't seen Ray for all this time.
So hi Raymond, I'm just going to promote you to panelists, so you'll come on the screen with both of us in a few moments. So I'll just do that now. So you just need to start your video and audio, Ray, and then you should be with us. Wonders of technology. I think. Oh yeah. Hello, Ray. I haven't got your audio yet. I'm just going to.
Do you have me now?
Oh, hi, yeah, hi Ray, how you doing? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, David.
Ray, how nice to see you. How are you?
Very, very well, very well. I just popped in to say hello because I'm going out, but I'm very interested in your comment about the dancing thing. And I wanted you to refresh my memory, because when I cast all you guys with Brian Clements, we cast, if you remember, and God forbid, I can't remember the fellow's name, the very big actor.
Terry Wood.
Terry Woods, that's it, because of the thing. I was so amazed when Terry Wood came out with that time step.
Yes.
I would have never thought he would have been so light-footed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You did it, and then it was Terry's turn when he went into your brain to actually do it. And I looked at him on that rehearsal. I thought, I'm not seeing this. I couldn't believe that he was so light-footed because he was a very big man.
Yeah, he was.
And he did that time step absolutely marvelous with the arms swinging, and it made me smile. It made me.
Well, when I was in Jeeves with him in the West End, he was one of a group of them called the Drones. You know, Bertie Wooster's Drones, and so there were 3 or 4 of them, and they all did a routine. And I have to say, he was the one you watched because, as you say, he was a large man, but with the lightest feet you ever saw.
I know. I mean, I just, to this day, I remembered it so many times and told the story to different people at different lectures and things that I've spoke about this enormous man who suddenly is light-footed and doing the time step.
Yeah, well, of course he does it here.
Then I have to think back to when I was doing a show in America called Barnaby Jones with Buddy Ebsen. Buddy Ebsen was 6'4", and he was a great hoofer. I mean, he was absolutely incredible the way he danced. I think he did it on stage with the Yellow Brick Road. Judy Garland.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What's the show?
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Yeah, I think he danced originally in that. But I mean, Buddy Ebsen was 6'4", and he was so light-footed. So I don't know why I was so amazed, but it was just the size as well as Terry Wood. Terry, how you been keeping? Everything good for you?
Terry's on the screen now on mine.
Really?
Yes, I'm trying to tap, and Terry's watching me, and in a moment he's going to be able to do it. He was a lovely, very gentle man. He was delightful, Terry.
Yeah, he was a very nice man. I can't remember a lot about the show. I mean, I know the premise, what Dennis came up with, and Brian, but I shot so many shows of that and many other shows. I get in a muddle sometimes, wondering which show was which show and what was what.
Well, you were known very much as an action director, and I was the most unathletic, action-y type of person. But you got me doing a few things, I have to say. It was a great experience.
But I only used to, at that time in my life, I only used to get called and given scripts for action. And later on, much later on, I decided I was definitely going to get away from it and went for other parts, rather than do the action. I got too much action. And you forget things. I didn't. All these shows run into one another, especially the Avengers and the Saints and that. You remember cast and that and think, oh yes, they do. And that you meet the actor later on and say, well, when we did so, he says, no, that wasn't so. That was the Saints. So no, wait a minute. No. I was going backwards and forwards so much. I mean, it must be worse for actors because actors are doing many more shows than directors, I think.
Well, yes, I don't know, but this one was very memorable for me. I remember when we were shooting in the sort of country house, weren't we? And I'm chained to the radiator quite a lot. Yeah. And on the day we had to go there, they said, we were at the studio, and they said, well, if you like, you can go in the one of the unit cars or minibuses or whatever, but you're only scheduled to work, for a short amount of time. And if you want to make a quick getaway, why don't you drive up in your own car, which I had in the car park. And what I'd forgotten was that, of course, I had this very flamboyant shirt, and I had a very heavy makeup on, very stage makeup, and I had visions of being stopped on the motorway. What are you doing? So I drove extremely carefully, but it was all right. It was all okay. But it was the fact that I hadn't realized that makeup would be done at the studio before we went to the location. But, no, it was a good day.
It's always a terrifying thing, especially on film and television, that you are not going to turn up when you are going to be late. It's not going to happen. It's a terrifying thing for actors, directors, and everybody to think that that day is going to happen when you can't make it, and everybody's standing there, you know, waiting and waiting and waiting. Scary thing.
Well, the thing coming up where Joanna had to kick me backwards into the orchestra pit at Wimbledon Theatre, and that was you know, I was getting a bit worried about that, but it was all very carefully rehearsed, and we had all the cardboard boxes in the orchestra pit, and I did it, I think, twice. And then, of course, we didn't have time to shoot it there. The day finished, we hadn't done it, and the whole orchestra pit had to be built at where were we? Pinewood, and in the studio with a rail round it and everything, and we were raised up. So I did it again in the studio. But, no, that was good for me, really, because that's not the sort of thing I would have done normally. I did a television play sometime, I think, before that, where I had to play a Welsh young man who becomes a rugby player, and they want him to play for Wales. So, and I had always avoided games at school. And I'd only ever once played rugger, and not understanding the rules at all. I didn't touch the ball or anything. I just sort of stood there. But suddenly I found myself with 29 real Welsh rugby players at Pontypridd on the ground. And I got knocked out twice because we had a thing where I had to run with the ball past the camera, and this guy was following me, and I heard cut, and he obviously didn't respond to cut. He had to have a whistle, I think, and went straight into me, took the legs from under me, and down I went and knocked out. And the next thing I knew, the director was saying, "Are you all right?" And of course, very bravely, you sort of say, "Oh yes, I think so." He said, "Well, we'll take it again then." And that's virtually the same thing happened. Terrifying. But no, that's what's rather good about this job, because it forces you to face either fears or the unknown, in my case, because I've never done anything like that.
Way back when I was a stuntman, the great thing about this, seeing what Philip is doing now, is when I can't remember things, and I've done a couple of these with him, the audience and the viewers nearly always come up with the answer. They know the shows. I mean, they know more about them than we do. But I remember many years ago when at the BBC making a show as a stuntman called The Splendid Spur. It was a BBC show, and I was a cavalier, not a cavalier, but the lead was a cavalier, and I was a badman, and I used to do the sword fighting with the stunt coordinator on that. That was a gentleman called Peter Diamond, who was the fencing man, and I had to do this sword fight with him, and at the end of it, he throws me back against. I throw him back against a column. We're lunging with a sword. Exchange. The outcome being, he arrests me and says, "I'm going to take you to the sheriff." And we had a piece of wood cut out of this beam about that big, with rubber in, so he could go back and hit his head against it. When it wouldn't hurt him. Tell you what, when he got dressed to do the part, they put high heel boots on him to do this. So it made him 2 or 3 inches taller than he was. So we get to do the fight. I throw him back against the column, and his head hits the wood, not the rubber. And I saw his eyes glaze over, and I knew he was going down. I'm still standing with a sword in my hand, no more routine to do. We finished, that was the end of the routine. And he started to sink. So I rushed forward and grabbed him and pulled him up and said, "Take me to the sheriff." And I turned him around and pushed him forward. And as I pushed him forward, one of the props guys threw water on him to wake him up. And he was sort of woke up because he had 2 more scenes to do, and it was a live show in those days. But I mean, it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying, getting knocked out on the set. I saw his eyes going round and round, and I knew his next line was, "I'm taking you to the show." So I grabbed him and said, "Take me to the show."
That was very good. That was very good thinking. Saving the day.
But at the same time, on other days there, that was at the Shepherd's Bush studio, we were running around in the Daleks saying, "Exterminate, exterminate, exterminate." They were funny days, but good days, very good days.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What's happening on the show now?
So we've got David and now with Gareth Hunt and Patrick in the main in Patrick's house, and I think they're just trying to connect the members of the three-handed game and working out exactly what Juventus trying to do. Do you have any sort of vivid memories of this Ray at all, the episode, or is it just one of those that not particularly?
Not particularly. It was great fun. I know that. Didn't we shoot some in Windsor?
Sorry?
Didn't we shoot some in Windsor?
I don't remember Windsor, no. But we did shoot in and around Wimbledon because of being at the theatre. There was a house with a rather ornate garden that we filmed in. We'll probably see it coming up. And Gary Raymond was meant to be the owner, and he was playing a sort of memory man at the theatre.
Yeah.
So I remember that. And then there's quite a few shots outside the theatre. And it's the place where you can see Wimbledon because there's an evangelical church opposite the stage door, and you could see the sign up, I remember.
Yeah, I remember working by the stage door there. Yeah.
But I didn't go to Windsor. You may have done with other scenes, but I didn't meet a lot of the people in the other threads of the story, which of course you often don't when you're filming. You don't rehearse with everybody else there.
No, you don't have them all on the same day.
Because there is a big scene at a racetrack a bit later on where there's a car racing track. So I'm not quite sure where that was filmed. I don't know if you joined us at the beginning, Ray, but we were watching the pre-credits, and there's a lovely moment where David is doing some tapping, and then an arm comes out and knocks him out. I don't know whether you might remember whether that was your idea, or whether that was Dennis's or Brian's, or
that was my idea.
Sorry, Ray?
My idea that.
That was yours. That was yours.
Not scripted.
Oh, it was your idea. Oh, it's a lovely idea. Well done, Ray, for that one.
Goes back to silly action, you see, and I started David off on his action career.
Yes. I was very flattered to be the still shot for the credits, the opening credits. That was very exciting. So I didn't realize when we were doing it that was going to happen.
One of us would have come up with it because Dennis and Brian were great writers. I mean, they used to come up with some great ideas. Great ideas. Brian and Dennis. We've spoken to them before about on the Avengers on this Phillips show here. They're all good writers. All good writers.
Oh yeah.
All good writers. We did Targets a little while back with Lee Vance. He followed me over to America, Lee Vance, and lived over here with me. Well, he lived in Los Angeles. I'm in Virginia now.
Was there a reason why Dennis and Brian used to collaborate so much? Would Brian always like to do a polish of the scripts, or was just?
It was a thing with Brian and Dennis. They collaborated a lot, and they used to like collaborating a lot. And if they were in a problem, I can't call it writer's block because I never saw those two get writer's block. If something wasn't working out for them, you used to see them sit down and work it out. And the conversation always started. There were these two fellas. If they were ever in trouble or said anything, either Dennis would say to Brian or Brian to Dennis, there were these two fellas. And they used to look at each other and he says, yeah, but what did he do? And they used to work something out, and then they went back to their own office and finish the script and work it out. Sometimes they didn't take credit for each other working each other's things out, but some of the times they did. But it wasn't so much as a collaboration with them. As I say, it was just a helping hand. You know, other writers do sit down and collaborate and work it, and then they go back and have to rework it. Well, you know that. You've done a lot of writing, haven't you, David?
Well, yeah, I by the time when I worked with you, I was already writing children's plays. And I think it was round about, did you say, Philip, it was 1976?
Yes, we've been, I think, late 76 at this.
Yeah, well, in 76, I wrote a play called The Gingerbread Man, which was not the usual sort of fairy tale one, but another one. And that took off. I was very fortunate with that. And it was done, it's still done all over the world, really, but it was done in London. Cameron McIntosh and I used to do it in London. This was before Cats and before Phantom and all that. And then all the repertory theatres picked it up and did it. I think it was mainly popular because it had a small cast and you could do it on one set. But that convinced me, really. I wrote the first children's play in 1967. So this was 9 years later, and really, it then became my main thing, and I've written a lot of them. But the acting did continue on and off. And
Jack and Nori.
Mm?
Did you do Jack and Nori?
Yes, I used to do Jack and Nori. Yes, I loved doing that. That was a great job. The first time I did it. Rather foolishly, in the rehearsals in the studio, I wasn't wearing my glasses, or I was wearing them. Yes, that's right, I was wearing them, so I could see the autocue. And I'd forgotten that maybe without the glasses, I wouldn't be able to see the autocue. So when we started the actual take, all the music came on and all the build-up and everything, and I couldn't see a damn thing. And so they had to stop and they had to because I was I don't know, I should really have said, oh, I'll do it with my glasses on, but I suppose I was a bit not wanting to do that, or a bit arrogant about all that. So they repositioned the camera and it was all right. But it was a lovely job, and you used to do 5 episodes, you know, one for each weekday. And you always used to do, I think it was episode 3 first. So that you sort of got used to it, and then by the time you got to do episode 1, you were in the swing of it, you know. But it was a real prestigious thing to do, because all the, you know, the big actors were queuing up to do it, and I was very surprised when I was offered it. It came as a result of doing If. For some reason, the producers of Jack and Nori saw If and they thought I'd be good at doing it. I was very grateful, because then I had a whole second career in children's television, doing shows like Play Away and that I loved doing all that. It was a little bit limiting because certainly in those days it was very much the second division if you did things for children and you weren't taken as seriously in your main acting. And whereas I had done classic serials at the BBC, I'd done all sorts of stuff, and that sort of dried up really. But no, I had a good innings. I was perfectly happy, and I don't know. It was very exciting working at the BBC then. It was like it was being a corporation. You felt you were working for that company. And you rehearsed in this rather nice set of rehearsal rooms in North Acton, and there was a canteen at the top, and you'd see you'd see Morecambe and Wise would be up there, and all the cast of Porridge would be sitting on one table, and the Troubleshooters would be on another table, and so on. It was extraordinary, really. And you used to get another job sometimes. Now, funnily enough, Gareth Hunt, who we're watching at this very moment, Gareth and I were in a thing called the Love School, which was all about the pre-Raphaelite painters. And we were rehearsing on the first floor, and the canteen was on the 7th floor, and you had to get in the lift to come down. And I came down after lunch one day, and a few minutes later, Gareth came down, and he came in white-faced. And I said, "What's the matter with you?" He looked really shocked. He said, "Well," he said, "I got in the lift, and on the way down," he said, "I got offered 3 episodes of Doctor Who." And it was Barry Letts who happened to get in the lift at the same time, and said, "Oh, you look as though, oh yeah, who's your agent? What's your name?" And he said, "Yeah, 3 episodes of Doctor Who," and lift doors open and he was out. But it was true. It was a bit of a clique, really, because you did sort of hope you get your next job just by having lunch in the canteen.
Well, the BBC was always prestigious. The name, mainly, I guess, the association of war years. You know, the hearing the news during the war as children, we grew up with it. It was so prestigious. This is the BBC, Richard Dimbleby. You know, I mean, it used to be a wonderful thing to hear. It was England. It was safe. It was home. And the Queen used to talk, and the Prime Minister used to talk. It was very prestigious. Go to BBC. I used to like going to BBC Shepherd's Bush because there was a pie and mash shop round the corner. You get studio jelly deals and pie and mash round the corner lunchtime. It was very good. I used to love it. Oh, Shepherd's Market, not Shepherd's Market, Shepherd's Bush Market.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Then there was the
Well, that was the Lime Grove, wasn't it?
That's right, Lime Grove, and the Shepherd's pie around the corner. Yeah.
No, Lime Grove. I look back now because I did work there once. That was for a Jackanory, and it was a lovely Jackanory because it was spread over 2 weeks, so there were 10 episodes, and it was, I think, the 2000th edition, and it was The Hobbit, and they got 4 of us to read the story and play the characters rather than just one talking head, and it was Bernard Cribbins, and I sort of knew him before, but by the end of doing it, I persuaded him to be in My Gingerbread Man in the West End that Christmas, which was good. There was Jan Francis, who was an actress who I very much admired and was lovely, and Maurice Denham, of course. And Maurice Denham was one of the great actors on film, but also on radio. And so that was a really exciting time, and that was in Lime Grove. And I suddenly realized that my favorite television program when I was a child, which really influenced me hugely, was a program called Whirligig. And Whirligig was a sort of magazine program on a Saturday afternoon, introduced by Humphrey Lestock, an actor. And there was a puppet for Mr. Turnip, and there was a bit of piano playing from Steve Race, and there was a ventriloquist, and there was a magician. And all those things I ended up being interested in and doing, and they led to all sorts of things that I've done in the future. And of course, my company, I had a company for 25 years touring children's theatre called Whirligig, which was named after this program. I suddenly realized that I was probably in the same studio at Lime Grove as that program was shot in, and it was done live, of course. So I was always very had sort of nostalgic feelings about Lime Grove. And they got rid of it. Well, it was some years ago, wasn't it? Now, Ray, it was a long time ago, I think. Yeah. They got rid of it.
The 3 actors you mentioned, I've worked with all 3 of them and directed all 3 of them, especially Bernard. I mean, I love Bernard. Bernard, funny man, very funny man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's, I mean, he's still with us, and he was doing a children's series only a year or 2 ago. Old Jack's Boat, was it called? I'm not quite sure. Yes, on again BBC. And no, he was one of the great. I mean, Jackanory was really his baby. I mean, he did Jackanory more than anybody else, and was brilliant.
Bernard also was what he could do a sight gag.
Yes,
you know, so fast. When you were directing, working with him, he come up with an idea and do something. I mean, I was doing an Avengers with him. I never forget it. In Steve is looking for a message, which Bernard Cribbins, who is a joke writer, has written this message down. And so Steve, I can't remember it properly, but Steve goes to find him. And Bernard Cribbins, the way I shot it, is sitting there at a typewriter and he's typing. Right, he goes. Right on the floor. And when you pull back, there is this biggest pile of jokes that is no good, all screwed up. Now, Steve and Diana have got to go right through this pile to find this telephone number on this message, and they're sitting there throwing them all in there. And then she starts laughing at the jokes. But he came up with that idea. I mean, the way to do that, because normally it was just doing it and throwing it on the floor. But he came up with it. He's a good sight man, very good sight joke.
Yeah. No, lovely man too. Oh, we're in Wimbledon Theatre now.
Yeah.
Which we know is not, but the audience won't. How big an audience you got there today, Philip?
I think we've got a 20 today.
Good.
Not bad audience. Joseph, who's watching, did say that the track was Silverstone, which did that scene at.
Yes, I nearly got killed. I had to drive myself to Silverstone to do this shot. Actually, you only see my foot in the shot doing my little tap dance thing.
Yeah.
And when I arrived, I drove straight across the track, nobody there to stop me. And just as I got over the other side, through came the racing car.
The driver who was driving that car was Val Massetti.
Right.
It was his own car because they were in the restaurant business, the Massetti family. And Val used to come and do some stunt driving for me from time to time.
Yeah.
So I chose him with the car. But the guy who nearly knocked you spark over there was Val Massetti. It frightened him as much as it did you.
I'm sure it did, yeah. I'm sure it did. But yes, it's quite exciting, this episode, the more I remember. But yes, we're coming out onto the stage in a minute, I think.
You're going to take your backwards paw.
The shots that I really like, because I do love Wimbledon Theatre, it's very atmospheric. I suppose Edwardian theatre. I think it was 1910 it was built, and it's got a lovely sort of almost stained glass window effect at the back of the circle. And Ray, you must have noticed that because you shot at it a lot. There was a thing from the stage looking up.
Tiffany glass.
Lovely. There's outside the stage door as it was. Oh yes, Russell Road. And here we are at Silverstone.
They're great things to do. You're doing good things, Philip, you know, showing all these stories. Philip, you gone to sleep?
Sorry, was that me?
No, Philip's gone to sleep.
Oh, Philip.
Let's see what questions we've had through. Simon was wondering about the lighting, and because obviously where David is canked up to the radiator, obviously it's very atmospheric. How much would you be relying on the natural light in some of these locations like the Wimbledon Theatre, or was it again conscious of trying to match the stuff in the studio?
David gave it away. It's in the studio matching. Yeah. Well, no problem at all. We had enough light to do it, and the cameraman matched it perfectly, easily, very easily. In actual fact, in the theatre itself, the stuff that was shot there had to be filler put in the front of that anyway because there was too much backlight. Like you probably got here with me now. I've got a lot of backlight here.
I mean, did you prefer shoots like this way when it was very much based on location? Because it must have been quite a bit of a difference to being confined to Pinewood all the time.
For me, I don't know, David, it all depends on the subject. I mean, it all depends on the intensity of the narrative and what it is. I think that guides you for what it is. If you're in a courtroom, obviously easier to shoot it on the stage. They build a courtroom so beautifully on the stage, it's better to see. But if you've got narrative that's taking you into backgrounds and things of interest, locations obviously, and locations are cheaper. You haven't got to build the sets.
Well, here comes my only shot at Silverstone. There you go.
Do you remember Dave was talking about his audition at the beginning? Do you remember that audition in the telephone box? Do you remember that when he called wanted to demonstrate his tap dancing ability and he did it over the phone and he convinced you?
Yeah.
Well, it was very sensible. He said put the receiver down on the floor and do a little tap for me. Yeah, I always remember that. I think there was someone waiting to use the telephone box outside. They thought I was mad. But it got me the job.
Because you went and practiced to learn that time step, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. No, it was just very funny. I mean, the whole thing was very amusing, really, to do it.
You're lucky that the weeks after you didn't get Lionel Blair calling you up saying, "Come and join the chorus." Or
yes, absolutely. Yes. Come and well, if he'd said the Palladium, I think I might have had more lessons. It was always my ambition to play at the Palladium, and it never quite happened. But I wrote a musical. I was about 22, and I had this musical which was actually on in the West End, and the band call was at the Palladium in one of the big bars at the front of the Palladium. And as I'd written the songs, they said I could go along to the band call. And I thought, I'm going to go in the stage door of the London Palladium. I'm going to experience the going in. I've always wanted to. And they directed me down the side of the stage in order to get through to the bar. And the curtains, the tabs were out. And there was a little bit of light, and I stood in the wings, and I thought, I can't resist this, because there was nobody else in the place. So I went out and stood in the middle of the stage, imagining I was Bruce Forsyth or whatever, and I sang a little song all to myself before going up the bar. So I can genuinely say I played the Palladium, but nobody was there to witness it.
I've done that sort of thing all the way around the world at different places. Before the unit got there, or while the unit was even there giving me a cheer, so I could just say, "Hey, I've stood on the Grand Opera House in Rome."
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. How long were you in LA, Ray? Were you there some time?
Oh yeah, many years.
Yeah.
Many years. Yeah. I'm coming up to I'm retired now, except for writing novels, but 64, 60, 67 years in the industry. Now, but Los Angeles, but I used to travel a lot outside Los Angeles, especially back to Europe, because American producers over in Hollywood were going to do a pilot somewhere in London or Rome or France, and say, well, why don't they use that English director? Ray Austin, he knows the units, he knows the crew. So I used to get chosen to come over and shoot lots of pilots and things in England. Then back home I go, or off to South Africa. But my main thing was LA until we moved here 34 years ago to Virginia. And I used to travel from Virginia here down to Los Angeles or back to England or wherever in the world someone was daft enough to employ me. That's the way it went. I had a good time. Still having a good time.
Good for you.
Listen, I've got to leave you guys now because I see Wendy is fidgeting around, deciding it's time we left, and we're going out for a meal now with 4 friends.
That sounds lovely.
Social distancing because we're still partial lockdown here. So look after yourself, all of you, and it's lovely to see you.
Thank you, Ray, very much. It's a privilege to see you, sir. I haven't seen you for all these years, but I remember it with such affection. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And thanks all you, Philip, and all you fans again. Keep coming.
Will do. Thanks for joining us. Bye. Have a nice day. Bye. I'll log you off, Lovey. that was nice. So yeah, Ray's been very kind to do a couple of my events in the past, so it was lovely you could.
No, that was lovely. That was really nice.
We're currently in. I think they. Do you remember where this house was?
No, you see, I was in this scene. You can just see me occasionally, but I can't honestly remember where it was. But I'm pretty certain it wasn't Wimbledon. It was rather nice. It's like almost like a park, isn't it?
I think that this particular scene that definitely looks like the Pinewood Gardens, but obviously the house we saw earlier was obviously somewhere else. So I think this is Pinewood. It
could be Pinewood, couldn't it? It could be the grounds of Pinewood. Yes, probably was. I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Joseph commented. Yes, it was indeed in the ground of Pinewood, but obviously the exteriors of the house obviously is somewhere else. But I would imagine it, for convenience, to be fairly close to both Pinewood and Wimbledon.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was just sort of wanting to ask you about your memories of the guest cast. Do you remember any of the obviously apart from the regulars, the 3 regulars? Do you remember the actress that played Helen in that scene, for example, or at all?
No, didn't. I don't think we ever met because we weren't. Well, of course we must have done because I was there, but I wasn't really in the scene. I was just clicking my my foot and lurking, so I never really got to talk. No, it was Annie Lambert, I think it was, wasn't it?
That does ring a bell. Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah. There you are. Oh, that was Joanna doing My Little Step. Aha. Now I think they're about to drive off to the theatre, aren't they? They're about to realise what had happened, all 3 of them.
And that little sort of step you do, that sort of little unconscious sort of almost sort of tick. Again, was that something that you'd worked on specifically, or was that quite easy to come up with?
Sorry, what that I'd worked on?
That little flip, that little sort of leg kick that you do as part of
the little kick. Well, it was part of the buffalo step or whatever it was. There was this one step which I was able to do from my lessons, which went da 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 da, and that bit was the end of the da 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 da. It was those last 2, and they seemed to think that would work, and so we did it. Yes. Now look, I'm very sinister now. That's Terry. So you've got the 2 woods talking together.
Yeah. I mean, would you have much say in terms of your outfit, your character? Would you have studied the mannerisms of it was Stefan Griff who played Javanka?
Yes, probably. Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, I was in a couple of scenes with him, so I watched what he was doing. Yeah, absolutely. But we weren't meant to be physically alike, but they just wanted to be possible. There we are. Now we're in Wimbledon Theatre. Those are those lovely sort of stained glass things up at the back of the circle, and that's coming onto the stage. That's the pass door onto the stage, and in a moment they're going to put the spotlights up, aren't they? I think. And Joanna had a dance double because she was not a real ballet dancer, although I think they thought she might have been when they booked her. There was but she had a stunt double as well, and there was one occasion where there were three purdies all sitting having a cup of tea together, all dressed the same, all with the same wig on. Yes, there's the spotlight. Yes, it's a lovely old theatre. It's a beautiful theatre. It still is.
So the interior hasn't changed much at all over the years?
Not really, no. Here we are on the stage. This is really on the stage. And at some point, I think one wouldn't know, but I think it changes to at Pinewood because we haven't got time to finish it off.
Yeah.
but that was great fun, choreographing that bit. And there I go. And when you think it's about a second and a half, and it took ages to pluck up the courage to do it.
Oh, yeah. It seems simple, but to go backwards like that, it takes a lot of trust in other people. Because you never had a stunt double, I take it, on this at all.
Never had a what?
You never had a stunt double.
No.
Yeah.
I did on North Sea Hijack.
Oh yeah.
I had to be shot. I was standing on a sort of tire thing, being lifted up in the air with Roger Moore, and it wasn't Anthony Perkins, but it was one of his henchmen shot me, and I had to fall down onto the deck, and it was a very experienced stuntman who did the job. And he fell really hard. And I saw him at breakfast at the hotel the next morning. I said, "Are you all right?" So he said, "Well, yes." He said, "I had a few bruises." He said, "But I've rubbed them out, and now I'd be all right." And so they're amazingly hard, these gentlemen. And what was strange then? I mean, I know I'm talking about North Sea Hijack now, but it was a night shoot, and we were waiting to do the shot in the sort of an area of an oil rig supply vessel. There were just a couple of benches. I suppose it was where people ate. And I found myself sitting there with James Mason, Roger Moore, and they were opposite me, and Anthony Perkins next to me. I mean, it was extraordinary. And I had a pair of glasses in those days, which were really a bit like National Health glasses, round ones, and they had rather affected blue lenses in, and they liked them, and they said they wanted me to use them, but of course I only had one pair, and so there was no spare. And just before we were due to be called and go up, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was straightening the things, and a lens fell out, and a little screw fell out on the floor. And I thought, oh my God, we haven't got I've got and I had to have it nice, ready for the stunt man. He'd got to wear them because there wasn't another pair. And so for about 10 minutes, Roger Moore, bless him, and I were kneeling down under the table of this thing, looking for this little screw. He was ever so good, and he helped, and he found it, and then we tried to get it back in and screw it back in. And always remember that. And then, of course, as I say, the stuntman had to wear them, and I was a bit worried then that they were going to break or something, and him falling off, and that I wouldn't have them for the rest of the show.
Would that be George Leach who doubled you for that? Because George Leach is one of the stuntmen on North Sea Hijack.
Sorry, I'm having trouble in hearing you, Philip.
I was wondering whether it might be George Leach who doubled you for that scene. He's quite a sort of famous stuntman.
Yes, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't one of the ones that I'd met before, but he was certainly. He'd been around, yeah, he'd been around, and there was a group, and you very often used to see them, and they were extraordinary.
Yeah.
But when I did If, and Malcolm McDowell and I had to be on the motorbike, which we did. It was virtually the last day of the shoot, so the producers had the film in the can, but Lindsay Anderson wanted us to go very fast. We had no crash helmets. I was wearing a Isadora Duncan style scarf, which I've had visions of getting stuck in the spokes of the wheel. It was a sort of 800cc motorbike. Malcolm had never driven one like that before. He'd been taught on a little pop. And the bike wasn't taxed or licensed. We were on a public road. And just before we were asked to do it, I overheard our stunt arranger, who was Peter Braham, a very fine stunt arranger, talking to Michael Medwin, one of the producers, and he was saying, "I just want to say that I will take no responsibility at all for what happens on this shot." He said, and off we go. And Malcolm, to give him his due, he was very good. I mean, he went quite fast, but there is a shot in the film where you can see him sort of saying something to me, and I sort of terrified on the back, whisper back, but he's sort of saying, "You all right?" And so, yes, okay. And of course, we had to do that 3 or 4 times and go round a roundabout very fast. But there were some shots later on. People may remember the shot where the girl is standing on the bike with her arms out, and it's a sort of symbol of freedom or whatever. And she is between Malcolm at the front and me at the back. And I'm sort of holding on to it. In fact, that wasn't me. That was a local young man they found who was a motorbike enthusiast, and they felt it would be safer to do that. But I don't think he was trained, and there was certainly no insurance or anything like that in those days. No health or safety existed.
No. I was wondering about because you have a couple of actors that you do encounter through the episode. I was wondering whether any of them stick out beyond obviously Terry Wood we've mentioned and Annie Lambert. Any other people when you were watching the episode you thought, oh, I remember this person or that person? Or
so funnily enough, no. I don't think I ever worked with any of them before or after. It sounds strange, and you don't really get to know these people when they're only working on it for a day, or you're only there for a short time. Joanna herself, I had never met, but when I arrived at Pinewood on my first day and was asked to go into makeup, and this was at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and she was under the dryer, having had her hair beginning to be done. And Joanna was known mainly before as a model, and she'd done a couple of films. And there was this general attitude, I suppose, that she was somewhat of a blonde bimbo, which as I came in, and there she was under the dryer, and she was halfway through the Times crossword at 7 o'clock in the morning. I thought, ooh, no way. And we have kept in touch. I mean, I had an email from her only last week, and she was great fun, and she was very, very good. And of course, she's done some wonderful things since. Now I'm a huge admirer. And Gareth Hunt, as I say, I did work with him, and now if you put me on the spot, I can't tell you whether that was before or after doing the Avengers. It's funny, you can't actually remember the first time, but he was great. And a friend of mine, another actor, died some years ago, and he was one of Gareth's best friends, and Gareth spoke at his funeral incredibly well, very, very movingly. No, they were a lovely team, actually. And although I didn't work with Patrick Macnee at all, I suppose I met him a couple of times in the studio, and he was delightful. No, the whole thing was one of those experiences you look back on with great pleasure. I'm very glad I did it.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful episode. I think one of the best that they've done, definitely. It's interesting you said about Gareth being offered Doctor Who by Barry Letts, because obviously he never appeared in Doctor Who, so something must have happened. Maybe he wasn't available or something like that. But it would be lovely to have seen him in. It's always, of course, such a shame that Gareth left us far too soon. I think he would have been one of those actors that was very accessible, like yourself, interested in talking to people. So
I agree. No, he was very versatile too. I mean, he was very special.
Oh yeah, definitely. We had some questions come through, so I'll just try to work through a few of these. We had a question from Simon, who said, unlike most television of this era, the new Avenger was made by an independent production company. With that in mind, was it any different atmosphere to working with, say, the BBC, ITV, because it was independent, or didn't you notice?
No, that's an interesting question. It was more like working on a film which of course it was, because it wasn't like doing something for television in a studio and a few scenes done on location. You know, there was a time, wasn't there, when you would watch a serial. I remember doing, I was in a Z Cars and I was in a Troubleshooters and things like that. And it was totally noticeable when you went from film to studio. It just looked different. And indeed, it was different. And I think the exciting thing was when things started being made on film for television, such as the Avengers, it was a slightly different, a different world you entered into, because the whole thing looked just like a film, which indeed it was. And so they were based at Pinewood, so that was like being on a film set anyway, and you were on a film set. And so the only difference from my point of view would have been that you didn't have much rehearsal, rather like in a film, you sort of just do it. You don't have a week or 10 days in the rehearsal room before you go into the studio, and it's all blocked out, and where, rather like in the theatre. And that there was that middle road that television sort of was. It was a bit like working in a theatre. But no, something like this. I mean, I remember doing, I did an episode of Van der Valk, and that was this mixture of studio and film, which I say was very, very obvious. And I did get the chance. I did go to Amsterdam for one night, and I had to film a scene. The only thing I did was to go into a boatyard. I was a policeman working under Van der Valk, and it happened to be pouring with rain. And if it hadn't, they would have had the fire brigade pouring rain all over us anyway. And I had to lurk in this boatyard looking for somebody, and then be hit very hard on the back of the head with a plank, and have to collapse onto the ground, a gravel ground with water. All this. That was the extent of my filming experience in Amsterdam. But it was great. But that was an independent company as well, and I can't remember what they were called. But they took over the old school in Hammersmith, Collett Court. And Collett Court was famous as a preparatory school. It was the one that was the first school ever to put on Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, because Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice were asked to write it for the boys of that school. Anyway, the school had moved or had finished, and this rather impressive building was taken over by, I keep on wanting to say Euston Films, but I don't think it was. I can't remember, but they took over the whole building, and they had their production offices, and they had the makeup and everything, and several of the classrooms were turned into offices that you saw, the police in the police station. And they filmed a lot in there, but obviously there was a certain amount of location stuff to do, a lot of which was done in Amsterdam. But again, there was that strange thing that when you watched it, you knew exactly when it was moving back into a studio situation.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of actors sometimes that I've spoken to who worked in live television, obviously there's the nerves of it being live TV, but of course they always really liked that 10-day rehearsal before, and it all being sort of very carefully planned. And obviously when everything was moving to film, you didn't really get that rehearsal. Did you as an actor miss that? Did you find it difficult?
Well, yeah, I never did live television as a main thing. I remember meeting, I did a television play which was by Nigel Neal, who wrote Quatermass, and it was called The Chopper, in a series, I think it was the Menace series at BBC, and Patrick Troughton was in it. And you remember Patrick Troughton, who was the television actor. I mean, he was never off television, but he had of course started in the theatre. And I arrived early one day in the canteen, and he was having a cup of tea, so I went and joined him, and we had this extraordinary conversation which I've never forgotten, where he was saying that he did so much live television, which was really nerve-wracking, and he said it was like doing a first night in the theatre very regularly. And he honestly thought that it had taken a toll on his health and that he would die quite young. And we got this very serious conversation. And I was saying, oh, no, I'm surely not, surely not. And in fact, it did sort of happen, because I think he was in his 60s, but I mean, he wasn't of a great age at all. But he reckoned that his nervous system or whatever had been put out by the fact that he did so much live television, which really put him in a state of terrible nerves. But I did several things at the BBC. You always had this rehearsal period. Maybe there had been some filming as well. I mean, the Love School, where we went and filmed. Peter Egan and I were filming. I was playing his brother, and we went up to the Trossachs in Scotland, which was lovely, a lovely 2 or 3 days. But the one thing that the BBC never did was called rehearse record. And rehearse record, I first came across in at Granada in an episode of Family at War. You remember the series set in the Second World War, and what you did, you rehearsed, and then when you went into the studio, you didn't necessarily shoot in sequence. It was rather like a film. You did a scene here, and then you went back in time, and then you did another scene, whatever was more convenient and financially easier and better on the budget. But you actually rehearsed the scene in the studio, and then you recorded it. And then you went on to the next scene, and which I always thought was probably quite a good idea. Although it's true to say that doing something like, there was a classic serial I did called Fathers and Sons, based on the Turgenev novel. And there we very much went in sequence. It was like, you had the script, it was just like doing a play. And there was an atmosphere in the studio, because you were going from one scene to the other, and you very rarely actually stopped. And occasionally, maybe if something went terribly wrong, you might stop and go back and do a bit. But the whole idea was to preserve a sense of theatricality, I suppose, in not relaxing and then going back. And that was quite good. But no, the Avengers was just like doing a film. And as such, exciting, sometimes boring, because very often you'd be sitting around waiting and nothing happening. But the great thing about Ray, I remember, was the fact that he got however much he had to do in a day. On the whole, it all got done, and he could never be accused of running over or costing them a lot of money. No, he was very well prepared. That's the other thing, because the great thing was with directors that you really wanted them to know what they were doing, what they wanted, so that you weren't just in a vacuum waiting to be told what to do. I mean, no, he was very good as an action director. He got it all worked out physically and choreographically, as it were, where people should be. No, it's very good.
And so obviously he very much controlled the action, but when it came to your performance, was he one of those directors that you could just kind of do your own thing and he would sort of guide you as needed, or was he sort of more sort of micromanaged in terms of a director?
What, Ray? Yeah. No, he knew what he wanted, and was able to show me what he wanted, and we just were able to do it. No, my main concern was my feet. I didn't worry about much else, but he made that work as well.
The costume you have in obviously the very theatrical costume, was that something that was just thrust upon you, or were you able to sort of design that? Or
no, I obviously, I suppose, went for a fitting, and that they wanted something which would immediately say tap dancer. No, I mean, I think it was stretching it a bit even then, in a sense, because I don't know what the show was on at Wimbledon Theatre. It was obviously some sort of variety show. And I, as a soul tap dancer, I mean, you very rarely would actually see an act of a solo tap dancer. And the Memory Man idea, which I thought was a lovely idea, because of course it tuned in with the whole thing of memory and mind being taken. It was very clever. But there was a man, Leslie Welch, who was the Memory Man in the music halls. But even by then, I think it would have been unlikely to actually see him. But that was part of the fantasy of it, which I think was part of the fun of the Avengers. And so it didn't really matter.
Because how did working on the Avengers, obviously, which is very much a fantasy-based show, how did working on the Avengers compare to, say, other film and TV that you were doing around the same time?
Oh, I don't know. I've never really thought of it like that. I mean, it was just the Avengers was one of the ones that, when you heard that they were interested in you and everything, you were very flattered by that, because it was all very well to do a BBC Two classic serial. And I did several of those. I did Cherie with Yvonne Mitchell, based on the Colette novel, Fathers and Sons, as I say. And those were very special in many ways, because they were quite demanding acting wise, and they were period pieces and so on. But they didn't have quite the cachet or the popular appeal of something like the Avengers or the New Avengers. And I suppose there'd be other shows like that. I suppose, like oh dear, you'll know. I've forgotten the title. What was the one? The Sweeney.
Oh yes, yes.
I suppose quite often they're to do with crime in the broadest sense. They're to do with goodies and baddies, aren't they? They're to do with fairness, and which is a very human thing, and we all like to root for the hero and be pleased and satisfied when the villain is got rid of, and so on. And they're classic sort of morality stories, I think, really. But no, there were certain shows that when you were asked to be in, you were really very very flattered, and this was certainly one of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had another question from Simon. He did say this was one of the first episodes that was shot in the new series, and there had been a gap of 6 years, 7 years between the original Avengers and the new Avengers. Because it was so early on when you joined, did you get a sense it was a well-oiled machine by that time, or were everybody kind of still finding their feet from your perspective?
No, you certainly didn't feel that anybody felt they were cutting their teeth. No, I don't know in which order things were shot, and whether this was the second season, or how it would have been worked out then. But no, what was interesting was that they were actually shooting, I think, 3 episodes at the same time. So you'd finish a scene with Joanna, say, and she would be dashing off to do a scene in another episode. And this happened later, of course. Things like the bill, the regulars on the bill, they come in and they'd be doing a bit of an episode all over the place. But for me, that was quite unusual. Of course, I was only in the 1 episode, but it meant that they had to retain quite a lot in order to be able to just slot in and think, right, where were we? Mind you, filming is always like that, because you have to think about where you are in the story. Has that happened yet or not? But that's part of the job, obviously. But for them, I always felt it was a little bit more difficult, because you'd be working with different directors all on the same day. You might be doing a scene in one episode with one director, all 3. It's quite quite an undertaking. But that you say about the wheels turning, I mean, yes, it was very much like a factory, if you like, in the nicest sense of the word. And everybody knowing what they were doing, and you felt that it was very well organized. It was all in control.
Oh, good, that's lovely. Yeah, this is actually in the first season, 300 game. I think it must be sort of, I think broadcast 4th or 5th in, so it may possibly been filmed even earlier. So definitely sort of the first days of the new Avengers.
Right.
Jan wanted to know if you had any more memories of it that you wanted to share, maybe with the cast members, Arthur Lowe.
Well, where do I start? I have written a little book, which is available on Amazon, called Filming If, because when the 50th anniversary was coming up, 1968, we filmed it. So in 2018, we knew it was going to be the 50th anniversary. And the Lindsay Anderson Foundation, who had meetings and try and preserve the name and work of Lindsay, they invite me to their meetings sometimes. And it was suggested that I might write some of my memories down, which I did. Yes, well, where do I start? I mean, it was the most extraordinary experience. But Arthur Lowe, well, I can tell you my story there. He was a lovely man, but he was a very private man, and but very funny.
Yeah.
And when I was writing the book, I had to check on dates and so on, because in fact we shot If before Dad's Army started. And in my head, over the years, I had assumed that I was thrilled to work with Arthur Lowe because of Dad's Army, but it wasn't that. It was obviously Mr. Swinley or whatever in Coronation Street, and there were other things that he'd done. But there was a scene where he's making a speech welcoming new boys and so on, and Malcolm and Richard Warwick and I, the three of us, were quite near the front, and Arthur was so funny that we were laughing, we were corpsing, and there were all these other boys who from the school. This was actually at Aldenham School. A lot of people think it was all at Cheltenham. It wasn't. We were filming that scene at Aldenham School near Watford. And a lot of the boys were sons of diplomats who were working abroad, and they stayed throughout the holidays. And therefore they were available and were useful as extras. But Lindsay got very cross because we were laughing and we were thrown out. He said, no close-ups in this scene, then get out. And so we missed it, and you don't see us at all really when Arthur is doing it. But my best story really was that we didn't have dressing rooms or caravans or trailers or anything like that. Very low budget. But the school library at Aldenham was put at our disposal, and it was quite a long room. And so they divided it in two and said, right, the grown-ups, in other words, the teachers, the masters or whatever, would be down at one end, and the boys would be at the other end. And Malcolm and I were both 24. We were playing 17, but we were 24. But anyway, there was an afternoon where some of us were in there, and Arthur was down at the other end, and he was reading a book. And this school, we really thought was appalling because the decor of the school, and it had these outdoor showers, which we used, the shower scene. And so we were talking about it, and we were saying, anybody who sends their son to this school really should be shot. You know, I mean, it is a disgraceful, awful place. Little knowing that Arthur's son was actually at the school at that very time, and he didn't let on. I mean, we never knew, but afterwards I actually did write to his son, because Stephen Lowe wrote a book about his father, and it's actually, that story is actually in it, because he found it quite amusing. But no, he was he was lovely. What else can I tell you? Well, the motorbike scene I've talked about, which was terrifying. But great fun filming in Cheltenham, in the town, which is the scene where Malcolm and I have a mock fight, and that was when my trousers split. And actually there is about a second where you can see a great expanse of white thigh, because they tried to mend these trousers between takes with gaffer tape and so on, but it didn't quite work. But there was when we were fighting, in inverted commas, over the other side of the road where the camera was, there were many people, shoppers, people just in the high street, who decided to stand and watch the filming. And suddenly, as Malcolm was attacking me, pretending to attack me, there was a screech of brakes, because there was traffic going by all the time, and a lorry stopped, and a man got out wielding a hammer, and he came towards us. I couldn't see him, I was on the ground, and he started shouting at Malcolm, saying, "Oh, what are you doing to this poor man here? How dare you, how dare you?" And Malcolm, being Malcolm, just said, "Well, he started it, with all his fault." And a cheer sort of went up over it, and finally an assistant had to come in and say, "No, sorry, we're making a film." And this poor man had to get back in his cab and drive off, to great applause and cheers and everything. So I remember that with affection. That was quite funny. But no, there were quite a lot of challenges. And then, of course, there was the famous scene in the cafe, which that was just in one day, and that was a real transport cafe. And they shut it, or they didn't shut it, but they opened a back bit to serve the real lorry drivers while we were filming in the actual cafe. And this story, I mean, it's been told differently. Malcolm remembers it in a different way, but Christine Noonan, who was the lovely Christine, who was the girl, I think we only met that morning, and we had a cup of tea quite early on, and then they mapped out the scene and the choreography of that extraordinary bit where she becomes a sort of tiger and she goes for, and the music is playing from the jukebox. And so they were rolling around on the dusty floor doing all this. And then finally Lindsay was happy and they had to light the scene. So he said we could sit down. I was already sitting because of course I was not actually involved, but I was sitting at the table. But he said, you can have a cup of tea while they light it. And as Malcolm came and sat down, he said, "Oh dear," but dusting himself off. And he said, "Oh, Lindsay will be having us do it naked next." And there was this terrible silence. And suddenly Lindsay came up from behind and said, "Malcolm, I think you've just had the most wonderful idea." Now, I've never known, was this a plant? I mean, was Malcolm told to say this? I don't know. I didn't think he was, because he reacted. I mean, he's a good actor, but he reacted and said, "Oh God, what have I said? What have I said?" And Lindsay said, "Would you do it?" And he asked Christine, and I don't know, I suppose I was rather an avuncular 24-year-old. And she said to me, "Should I do it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I knew she was married. So I said, "Well, what about your husband?" So she said, "Oh, I'm not worried about him." So I said, "Fine." So I said, "But I think probably your agent should be called, because this wasn't in the contract, as it were.
Yeah.
And it should be worked out how it's done." So she said, "Oh, well, I haven't got an agent." And so I said, "Oh," so she said, "No, this is only my second job." She said, I played Gigi in Lincoln Rep, and this is my second job. And so in the end, she agreed to do it. And I mean, they cleared the cafe, the studio, as it were, and they shot it. And whether or not it was a good thing to do, I don't know. As far as the film was concerned, it was. But this was 1968. This was quite unusual. And I often felt that her career was damaged a bit by it, because she wasn't offered anything much after that, which didn't involve taking her clothes off, which I thought was a great shame. But there we are. There's an if story.
Lovely, thanks, Dave, for that. That's fantastic. I wanted to ask you about the Queen's birthday party and the play that you did for the children's party during the Queen's 80th anniversary. 80th birthday.
Oh yeah.
And obviously, was it 8 million people or something like that watched it on the BBC? That must have been quite.
Well, yes. the BBC rang me and said, would I go and have lunch? And that's always nice when someone invites you to lunch. And two of them told me that the Queen's 80th was coming up. This was about 7 or 8 months, I suppose, before. And they said that in various discussions, the Queen had said that she didn't want a big fanfare or whatever for her 80th birthday, but they maybe should do something for children. And a man called Peter Orton, who ran a company called HIT, and they made Bob the Builder, programs like that. And he had this idea that they should have a children's party at the palace, to which the Queen would invite. It turned out to be 2,000 children with one adult for every 2 children. So there were 3,000 people there. And they turned Buckingham Palace Gardens into a theme park, really. So you had Alice in Wonderland having the Mad Hatter's Tea Party on the terrace. You had on the lake down at the bottom of the garden, you had a wonderful ship with Captain Hook from Peter Pan. And there were lots of other things. And then they got the BBC involved, and the BBC said, well, why don't we do a play to celebrate children's literature? And so I was asked in, and my brief was to take as many iconic characters from British children's literature and put them all together into one play. So if you imagine that Mary Poppins would be able to fly with Peter Pan, say, and this was it was a very exciting thing. It was tricky for several reasons. One of which was that they said that if an actor was particularly associated with a particular children's literature role, that person had to be used. So if Harry Potter was going to be in the show, it had to be Daniel Radcliffe playing him. And we knew early on that there was a slight problem because he was taking his GCSEs at the time of when this live event would be going on, because it was going to be live. It was on a huge stage, bigger than the Live Aid stage, which some people will remember, and they wanted as many sort of starry people in as possible. And I came up with a basic idea, which was that the Queen would be inviting the characters to come to the party. And I had another idea, because one of the plays that I've written was an adaptation of Roald Dahl's The BFG, The Big Friendly Giant. And in that, Sophie, the little orphan, ends up living actually in a special wing at Windsor Castle. But I thought, well, Buckingham Palace, same thing really. And that Sophie, of course, was Sophie Dahl, Roald Dahl's granddaughter, who the book was written for. And I had met Sophie Dahl a few times. She was living in America. And I said, let's see if she'd be willing to come over and we could shoot a scene, supposedly, in the ballroom of Buckingham Palace, which is where a major scene in the BFG takes place. And she could be writing invitations to all these characters. Sophie said yes. And so they immediately went for this idea. And the BFG puppet, huge 14-foot tall puppet, which we'd had in my stage production, was there. And Buckingham Palace said we could actually use the real ballroom. And I don't think it's a secret to say that at one point the Queen agreed to be in the scene as well. She was going to be seen writing invitations with Sophie Dahl. Unfortunately, the Mail on Sunday, I think it was, decided to leak this information, and immediately the palace withdrew and said, no, she's not going to do it. But meanwhile, work went on. I thought the good is, yes, they invite, but maybe they don't invite the baddies. What happens if they don't invite Peter Pan, if they don't invite, Captain Hook, if they don't invite Burglar Bill, if they don't invite Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge from James and the Giant Peach, and you go through the list of them. And they're obviously going to be very offended that they're not invited. And so maybe they would decide that they were going to sabotage the party. So that was what it was all about. And various exciting things happened. I mean, suddenly someone said, well, what about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? And Johnny Depp had just played it. So I was writing scene for Johnny Depp and emailing his assistant, and he was coming back saying yes, he'd like to do it. Then he decided that it was a bit difficult to do it because as Mr. Whatever in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he was clean shaven, but he was filming Pirates of the Caribbean, and so he had a beard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he then had an idea that he should be making the Queen, because the idea I had was that he was making the Queen's birthday cake as Charlie, in the Chocolate Factory, a chocolate cake. And he came back with the idea saying that maybe he could wear a mask. I mean, it's a bit funny now with the pandemic mask that we're all getting used to, because he didn't want to infect the chocolate in the Queen's cake. So it seemed to be all possible. Anyway, that all fell through. And there were many, many times when things fell through. Glenn Close was going to come and play Cruella de Vil, but at the last minute that didn't work out. But there were various things which were quite amusing. I wanted the three bears. I wanted Rupert Bear, Paddington Bear, and Winnie the Pooh to be looking for the Queen's handbag. The reason being that the Queen was going to make a speech at the end. This was really happening. She was really going to make a speech at the end. And I knew this. And I knew that she would take her speech out of her handbag. And also I knew that she would be having to wear glasses, because she does when she reads the speech. So the idea was that the baddies were going to steal the Queen's handbag so that she wouldn't be able to make her speech at the end. The whole plot revolved around that. And Harry Potter and his friends actually magically managed to get the handbag back just in time for her to be presented with it by Tracy Beaker, as it happened, and she was able to read her speech. Anyway, the three bears were going to be looking for the handbag, and it was just a quick shot. And the Daily Express said, yes, Rupert Bear, he was allowed to come and do it. And Paddington Bear's creator, Michael Bond, and his publishers said, yes, that's absolutely fine. But Winnie the Pooh is owned by Disney. And, it's a bit of a surprise. But of course, it's true that all those films, he has an American accent. Yeah. And, well, when I tell you that an executive, the top executive was flown from Hollywood to meet me in the Disney offices in Hammersmith to discuss this scene. Well, we'd already said in an email, what we wanted, which was just the three of them looking for the handbag, walking to probably no more than 5-10 seconds worth or something like that. Anyway, he pointed out that no Disney character had ever shared the screen with a character from another stable, and therefore it was absolutely impossible. And we said, but that's the whole point of the thing, it's for the Queen. It's never been done before. We've got all these characters coming together, they're all doing things together. And he said, well, I'll have to go back and discuss this with my colleagues. And it took them weeks to decide that the only way we could do it was if Winnie the Pooh was in a little hut with a fence around it, within 100-acre wood, which is where he lived. And the other two, Rupert and Paddington, could arrive and look over the fence, and as if to say, have you found the handbag? And he would say no, and they say, right, well, we'll carry on, bye-bye. And this was partly because they didn't want Winnie the Pooh infected in any way by the other two, so there had to be this fence in between. And that's where we had to shoot it. And when I tell you there were other stories like that, that's something else I'm meant to be writing something about one day. But it was very, there were a lot of very good things. The Harry Potter people, they were filming one of the films at the time, and they said the BBC could have the sets for a whole day, and we could have the cast as well. So we were able to shoot with Daniel Radcliffe and Rupert Grint and Emma Watson and various others, which really did make it work. And we even, my idea was that when they were really in trouble, the government of this country had an owl in 10 Downing Street, which lived with an owl keeper in 10 Downing Street. And this owl would be dispatched to Hogwarts to get Harry Potter's help in a crisis. And I had this idea that Harry Hill should be the owl keeper, and we got him, and he did it. He did a lovely job. The owl was indeed one of the owls used in the Harry Potter films. They came over from America with this owl. There were two owls. There was an understudy owl. And on the first day we were rehearsing in Buckingham Palace Gardens, and this owl escaped. It just flew off somewhere into Hyde Park. And so the understudy owl was on for a bit, but they were terrified, of course, because this owl was valuable, and shot off to Hyde Park, and they managed to get it back eventually. But I mean, this whole thing was mad. I mean, it was wonderful. And Percy the park keeper, you know, was played by Alan Titchmarsh. Extraordinary things were going on, and as you say, it was seen live on BBC One on a Sunday afternoon by about 8 million people. So it was quite an experience. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. I think I might try to get Yogi Bear perhaps instead of Winnie the Pooh, but I don't know who Yogi Bear, but
yes, but Yogi isn't British, you see, Philip.
Oh no, of course he's not.
They had to be British characters, I'm afraid.
No.
And even, you see, Cruella de Vil, it's interesting because, of course, that's from 101 Dalmatians, which is a British book, Dodie Smith's book. And although it became a sort of American, well, it was a cartoon. First, it was a Disney cartoon, but then they decided to do the live action version, and Glenn Close played it rather well, I thought. She was terribly good. But sadly, she wasn't free, or she couldn't come over.
That's a shame. I did have a couple more questions. I was wondering sort of how you fell into the acting world, the writing world. Was it at university, and then what came first?
No, well, I was one of those boring children who knew what they wanted to do from a very young age. And I was in a play, I think I must have been 7 or 8. It was a play, I think, put on by the local church. And I felt quite comfortable up on that stage. And I also saw a television program in which there was a man called Billy Uke Scott, and the uke was for ukulele, and he used to play songs accompanying himself on a ukulele. And he had a team of dancing girls behind him. It was a sort of musical program. And I remember watching that, and I suppose I was 7 or 8 years old, and thinking, that's what I want to do. I don't know quite whether I wanted to be him or one of the dancing girls, really, but it was just the whole nature, the entertaining. And so at 10, I started doing puppet shows. I wrote puppet shows and did them in the garden with a couple of friends. And then we actually moved house then, and I went to a different school, and I started wanting to be in plays. They didn't do that many. But when I was 14, there was a drama course, a residential drama course for a week. And my headmaster, bless him, he recommended me to go on it. I was the youngest one, and it was the best week of my life. And I never changed from that. But then same headmaster, wouldn't let me go to drama school. He said, no, I think you better go to university. And I tried to get into Bristol University to read French and drama, failed to get in. Devastated, saying I've wasted all this time, at the age of whatever you are, 17, 18. And he said, well, we'll try and get you into Oxford. I said, well, if I can't get into Bristol, I'll never get into Oxford. But I did. And I had 3 incredible years at Oxford where I did theatre all the time. I scraped through with a 3rd-class degree, but I was so thrilled to get it. I didn't think I'd get a degree. I had a wonderfully indulgent tutor. But while I was there, I was in Dr. Faustus, which was the play that Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor came over to be in aid of the university theatre. I played Richard Burton's servant in that. And I was in a play which came into the West End called Hang Down Your Head and Die. I had the most extraordinary time at Oxford, and it was just inevitable what I was going to be doing after that, and it just sort of went from there, really. And the acting started, and the writing was going alongside. And there was a repertory theatre in Worcester called the Swan Theatre, and they invited me to go and direct and act, which was fantastic. And everything took off from there. And that was If came along very soon after that.
And I just wanted to touch on, we mentioned in the introduction, Vamp with Shelly Winters. Do you recall much about Shelly Winters in particular?
Well, yes, that was extraordinary. I had a play on in London, a children's play, and I was at a loss to what to do. It was just before Christmas, and I went into Harrods just to look around because the food hall at Harrods had these wonderful displays of fish and everything. And I came out, and there was a gypsy trying to sell pieces of heather. You know, when they do that.
Yeah,
and this had happened to me occasionally before, but I'd probably been a bit rude and not done anything. But on this occasion, for some reason, I gave her 2 shillings or whatever it was then. And she said, "This will bring you luck." And I went home, and home in those days was a little flat in North Cheam in Surrey. And so I got the tube and I got a bus and everything. And I got home. As I got home, the phone was ringing. And I answered it. It was my agent. He said, "Are you free?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you've got to go to Neasden now for an interview for a television play. They want to see you now." And so anyway, I went, and they told me that it was for a 2-hander play in which I would be opposite Shelly Winters, who would be coming over from America to do it. And they offered it to me. I didn't have to read or anything. It was extraordinary. I'd done If by then, and I'd done a couple of tellies, but they offered it, and it was the most extraordinary experience. I loved her. I mean, she was very difficult in many ways, but and she had great difficulty in learning all the words. It was a huge part, and she used to call me her rock because I wasn't allowed to make a mistake. And if I made a mistake, she'd leap around saying, "Oh, David made a mistake, David made," and all that. But she was playing an aging film star, a sort of Greta Garbo figure who was hiding in a flat in Park Lane in London. And I was playing a young film buff who suddenly thought he saw her in the street one day and plucked up the courage to buy a bunch of flowers. And he goes and knocks on her door. And she, of course, welcomes him in and ends up trying to seduce him. And it's rather sad because in the end, she's revealed as really rather an aging, lined lady who, whatever. So all sorts of things happen. Like she insisted that she was made to look glamorous, which meant having tapes in the side of her head, which pulled all her face up under the wig. But then she was very brave, and she said at the end, she said, when we open the windows, the curtains, the light has got to pour in, and you've got to see me as I really am. Which she did. But the point is that if you have these things pulling your face up, after about 20 minutes, it's so painful that you have to stop and have it taken out. So shooting kept on getting stopped. And we actually overran in the studio by 2 days, which is unheard of with television. And there was a David Frost program which had to be relocated. And there was an episode of On the Buses, which was cancelled. And we just carried on. And my overtime took me to America for a holiday, during which she, bless her, I met up with her and in her apartment with the Oscars on the mantelpiece and all that. And she took me out a couple of times to Lincoln Center and to a library and so on. And she was very, very sweet. And but I mean, sad in a way as well. I mean, on the very first day, she came in and at the coffee break, she had a polythene bag, and she poured onto a tabletop pills of every shape, size, description you can imagine. And she started making a little cocktail, and she said, "I have one of those and one of those, and that's for my thyroid, and then I have one of those, and then she drank them all back." And within about an hour, she was very, very tired. And I thought, well, you know, we're not going to be able to go on into the afternoon. But what I hadn't realized was that the huge rehearsal room we were in, which was in Neasden, where London Weekend had a rehearsal, they'd screened off one half of the room. And in the one half we rehearsed, and that was all fine. And the other side of the screen, there was a fully fitted hotel bedroom, complete with bed, wardrobe, dressing table and everything. And so about lunchtime every day, she used to go and have a nap, have a rest. And she would sometimes sleep right through the afternoon. And we would then have to start rehearsing at 5 or 6 o'clock. And in the end, they said to me, the producer said, well, you've been very good about all this. So we're going to give you an office. So whenever she's asleep, you can go to this office and there's a phone there and you can phone anyone, anywhere in the world, and, you know, just make the time your own and do what you like. But she was extraordinary. And there were several scenes where, because she hated the whole thing of being forced to do certain moves. I mean, she wasn't used to that. She was a method actress who just wanted to feel it and so on. But with a television thing, you really have to know where people are going to be. And she had to hit me several times and chase me around and everything. And it was very exciting. I mean, it was extraordinary. And I don't know that whether it set the world on fire. It got a couple of good reviews. We did go, and she after it had finished, she said, would I accompany her to the theatre one night? And so we went to see Albert Finney and Rachel Roberts in a play called Alpha Beta at the Royal Court. And I knew Albert Finney because he was a co-producer of If, and she knew him because, as she said about a lot of male stars, she had entertained them when they came to America for the first time. And Sean Connery, I looked after Sean and all that. And so we went along. It was rather like taking your granny to the theatre, because she put a scarf around her face, and there was a hire car to take us there. Nobody recognized her at all. And afterwards we went up to Albert Finney's dressing room, and he was very friendly, and oh, Shelly, and chatting away, and oh, David, nice to see you, and that. And there was a knock on the door, and you always, when a door comes, you look and choose a height, as it were. And I chose a height of someone, you know, about 6 foot tall, I suppose. And the door opened and a head appeared much lower down than that. And it said, hi, Albie. And then it saw Shelley, and oh, Shelley. And it was Kirk Douglas, who had come to see the show, and he's very short. And he came in the room, and his wife was just behind him, and he sort of tried to stop her coming in, I think. And he said, hi, Shelley, when he saw her. He said, well, I said, you're obviously busy. We'll do this again sometime. And he pushed his wife out, and one had visions of what on earth had gone on between Shelly Winters and Kirk Douglas years before. So no, it was rather like being in a wonderland, really, for a couple of weeks. But she was very cold too, very, very cold. And she had to move into a hotel. She was staying with Peter Noble, the critic, and the showbiz reporter, who was a great friend. But it was so cold in St. John's Wood that she decided she had to go into a hotel, and we had to rehearse sometimes with her in a tracksuit and a huge dressing gown and a hat and everything, lying in bed. And we were all in t-shirts because it was so hot, because the heating was full on. So no, a very memorable experience. But I was very fond of her. She was lovely, and of course she was extraudinary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, wonderful memories. Thank you for that, David. Just want to see if there's any more any questions in the chat before I just ask the last couple of questions. Just see what we've got. Oh, Ian just said he remembers the Jeeves play. David Hemmings played Bertie Wooster. He remembers that.
Yeah, I was actually Bingo Little. David Hemmings played Bertie Wooster, and I played his friend Bingo Little. Yes, it was not a success, but we all wanted to have a survivor's medal afterwards. We all thought we deserved a medal because we'd been through so much. And one of the things was I had to be flown in hanging upside down on a chandelier at one point, and nobody had told me about this earlier on. And oh, it was terrifying. And I was waiting up there, having descended. I was on wires, having descended and got my legs round and everything, all ready to be flown in. And suddenly I looked down, and the man who's called Inky, who was my flyman, who was one of the Peter Pan people who flew people.
Hmm.
And I saw blood was pouring down his forehead. And he was waiting to lower me in. My life was in his hands. And apparently he'd done an earlier cue with David Hemmings doing on the other end of a sort of church bell thing. And he'd gone up and by mistake hit his head and was ill. So I'm waiting up there for the cue for him to let me down. And I can see him sort of swaying down there. And suddenly from outside the theatre, there came the sound of, na, 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 na. It was the ambulance coming to pick him up. Yeah. And the cue came and he let me down. And apparently as soon as he'd safely put me down, he collapsed and was sent off to the hospital. So that was quite fun.
Joseph said that apparently he's got some records for the new Avengers, and the episode apparently was filmed in August of 76. So
right.
That's up.
Yeah, 76, right, yeah.
He said that Cantley Manor Hotel near Wokingham Lane in the episode. He's been there twice as part of Avengers location tours, that sort of thing. So to see what else we got. Yes, Ian did mention that we were talking about Terry Wood earlier, and Ian's correctly pointed out that Terry Wood was used again in a later episode of the New Avengers. So obviously,
was he?
They liked Terry.
Right.
I assume you just weren't available to come back, or
No, I should imagine Terry played a baddie, different character, I would imagine.
He played another villain.
I expect so. Yeah.
What else have we got? That one. Oh, we've had Paul says he loves Naughty Hijack. So he's a fan of Naughty Hijack.
Yes, we were halfway through shooting that in Ireland, in Galway.
Yeah.
And Andrew V. McLaglen, who was the director, who was about 6'7", and had done a lot of action films, The Wild Geese and things like that. And he came up and he said, David, we've been discussing your character. And I said, oh, right. And he said, yeah. He said, we've decided that you're a baddie. And I said, we've already shot half of it. I said, I had no idea. I thought I was innocent and a goodie. So he said, no, you're a baddie. So I said, well, I'm a bit worried about the other. No, it doesn't matter. No. He said, just carry on playing it, but I thought you'd like to know. So yes, that was a bit disorientating, because I suddenly thought, well, should I have been playing it totally different?
Well, I was watching a bit of Naughty Hijack earlier in prep for tonight, and I did notice that obviously your character's full of, it's very suspenseful as to which side you are, and I didn't realise it was also suspenseful for you as well, and sort of know. It works very, very well, I think, in the film. Ian's also pointed out that Love School was early 75, so that would have been the year before the New Avengers.
Oh, brilliant! Right, so I met Gareth doing that before I met him again on the Avengers. Mind you, we didn't have a scene together in the Avengers, but I do remember bumping into him.
And also, Simon's corrected me earlier, because we were talking about Gareth in Doctor Who, and I didn't think he was in it, but apparently Gareth was in the last 3 episodes of John Pertwee's era. Planet of the Spiders was his last story, so Gareth was in that, so that did come good. That was good. Simon's also mentioned Euston Films. I'm not quite sure where we were talking about that. Yes, must have been a Euston Films episode of Van der Valk. That was what that was coming in for.
Yes. Oh, I don't know whether it was Euston Films or not, but it was certainly an independent company. That was what we were talking about, the fact that the Avengers was an independent company. Well, so was Van der Valk.
Yeah. And also Simon mentioned an episode called Out of the Unknown, The Chopper, which is sadly missing. So I think that came up maybe when we were talking about Quatermass.
That was the Patrick Troughton.
Oh yes, that was
play. Yeah. I think I was playing a photographer, and he was somebody who mended motorbikes or something, and the chopper was a I mean, it was a pun really on the type of bike, I suppose, but on an axe as well. There must have been some gruesome story, but I've completely forgotten, I'm afraid. And of course, in those days, so many of the things got wiped and don't exist anymore. It's amazing how much in the 70s and probably into the 80s, very, very little seems to remain. I did a wonderful play called Mad Jack, which Jack Gold directed. It was a Wednesday play, and it was all about Siegfried Sassoon. And as usual, I was playing the best friend. Michael Jaston played Sassoon. And I thought that had been completely lost. And then by chance, I was working with a man who ran BBC Worldwide, or the video section. And he looked into it, and he found there was a tape, and he had one run off for me, but apparently it wasn't broadcastable quality, so they couldn't actually release it as a video. But at least I did get it, and it was very good. But there's so many things which don't exist, and all those comedy programs and things which they just wiped. It's extraordinary looking back, because they lost a fortune, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, so much of, I think it's some Morecambe Wise's early stuff, and so much of Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell's Doctor Who's, although some stuff still seems to be being found in corners of Africa and
yes, and abroad. That's right. Yes, a lot of things abroad.
And they think that a lot of things are in the hands of private film collectors who are perhaps a bit worried what will happen if they turn it back to the BBC, whether they'll get their copies back. Or so I think hopefully more stuff will come back. Well, you were talking about Patrick Troughton just then, and I did hear a story that Patrick, because we said he was always in work, he was always on TV, and I believe he was quite an insecure actor, and he always was a bit insecure of where the next job was coming from. So even when he was on something like Doctor Who, he would write postcards and send them to producers and directors and saying, well, I'm in this, but I will be available, think of me, that sort of thing. Did you ever kind of do that sort of thing, or was it?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, when I was in Rep in Worcester, which is this job I was very lucky to get, which would have been in 67, I suppose, 67, 68. And I had always known that I was in a business. A lot of people, when they entered the acting profession, they don't see it as a business. They see it as a more romantic thing.
Yeah.
But I was quite hard-nosed about it, and so I made it a rule that every day, no matter how busy I was, and in Rep you used to be rehearsing one play and playing another in the evening, so you were working all day, but every day I had to write 5 letters, and there was no computers or anything then, so it was 5 handwritten letters enclosing a CV, which we were able to duplicate on one of those old-fashioned machines, and a photo. And there was a booklet which still exists called Contacts, which gives you names and addresses of theatres, theatre directors, film companies, television, all the rest of it. And so I did 5 a day, writing to anybody and everybody who might be able to give me a job, radio producers, everything. And I worked it out that 35 letters a week, and I was in Worcester maybe for 8 weeks or something like that. It was quite a lot, and I got If from it. One of the people I wrote to was Miriam Brickman, and Miriam Brickman, not that I knew it, was the doyenne of casting directors, who was looking for people for school to play schoolboys in what it was called Crusaders then, and I was asked to go to London to audition, and that's how it all started. So I've always advised young actors that when I sometimes do workshops and so on in drama schools, I always say, you must think of this as a business, and you've got to try and generate your own work, because nobody's going to do it for you. And even if you get a good agent, that doesn't necessarily mean to say they're going to find you work. Yeah. They might do a better deal financially for you than you'd be able to do yourself. But the main thing is to just put yourself about. So I used to do postcards exactly like that. If I was in something, I would write to maybe 50 or 100 people saying, please watch. So, of course, you took a big risk, because you might be terrible. You might never get a job. And then strange things used to happen. I was in an episode of the Troubleshooters, and it was going out in the same week as Mad Jack, the one I just talked about, the Siegfried Sassoon one.
Yeah.
And of course, in my head, I mean, the Siegfried Sassoon one was the one. That was the Troubleshooters was just you know, a run-of-the-mill thing in comparison, as far as I was concerned. But I sent off my postcards mentioning both, and expecting that maybe I'd get offered lots of nice jobs as a result of the Mad Jack. And of course, nothing at all from that. But I did get one job straight away as a result of the Troubleshooters. So you just never know. I mean, and that's what's exciting about this business, really. You just don't know. But I do believe that you've got to try and make things happen yourself. You can't expect other people to do it for you. So, yeah, I sympathize with that and identify with what you've just said about Patrick Troughton.
Were you aware of any jobs coming your way because of the new Avengers? Were you conscious of that elevated you in any way, or? I
don't think so. I can't remember. I mean, it was at a time when my children's theatre interest was growing, and had been growing for some time. And indeed, you said earlier it was 1976 we did it. Well, in 1979, I actually managed to get my own company off the ground, and we toured to the big theatres, and we did Sadler's Wells and so on. So that was only 3 years later. So there was this sort of transition period where I was doing quite a lot of work, but maybe I wasn't searching for it quite as hard because I had this other thing. I had plays to write and all the rest of it. So I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look at a chronology of my career to see whether there was anything which came out of doing the Avengers. Because of course there was always that thing too, that very often something came out a long time after you'd actually made it. And you'd almost, you'd suddenly realize, oh, that's on, yes, maybe. But no, I can't directly associate anything with it, but you never know.
And how does the new Avengers sit in terms of your body of work? How important is it to you to have done it?
Oh, very, yeah, no, it's one of those, it's a prestigious thing, because I'm not saying everybody watched it, but everybody knew about it.
Yeah.
When they announced the new series, I mean, there was great interest in knowing who the new Diana Rigg, Linda Thorson character might be. It was rather like, you know, every year there'd be speculation as to who would play Peter Pan in the West End. And it may not sound much now, but it was always a big thing in the paper when Susanna York, say, or Julia Lockwood or Hayley Mills was announced to play the part. And there was the same anticipation with something like the new Avengers, and it was very much part of the public consciousness, I think. And so it was an honor to be asked to do it, really.
Just a final question with the new Avengers. Do you remember the actor that was kind of your sidekick for most of the episode, is going around with you, helping you drain the minds of...
Well, the very tall one with the beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very nice, but I can't. I mean, you know, I never worked with him again, and I can't remember his name now. No, that's terrible.
If anybody knows in the chat, you could put.
He didn't say very much, did he? He didn't say very much. I don't think we spoke much.
No, it's a very sort of.
He was a man of action, perhaps.
He was indeed, yeah. I mean, my final question to you is: out of all of your acting roles, whether stage or screen, do you have a particular? Obviously, avoiding perhaps but do you have a role that is your favourite, and if so, why?
Oh golly. Well, there are lots of things for different reasons, really. I mean, I was in a play when I was in Rep, Little Malcolm and His Struggle Against the Eunuchs, which was a play that had been on in London. John Hurt was in it in London, I think. And I absolutely loved doing it. I wasn't playing Little Malcolm, I was playing one of the other boys, and the room, that the set that had been created was very, very special, because it was really run down, awful sort of kitchen. And no, that I love doing that. But obviously, if changed my working life, I think one could say. That got me into television. And then I mean, Malcolm and I had done virtually the same amount of stuff when we did If. He'd done very little. He'd done some theatre work. He'd done a scene in Poor Cow, the Nell Dunn film. He did a scene where he had to be in bed with Carol White, apparently, but it got cut. So it wasn't in the film in the end. But he was absolutely determined to be a film star. That was all he wanted. And I went straight back into rep after it. I went up to Manchester and was in a show there. And I missed the opening of If because of that. But Malcolm, until the film came out, he was penniless, really. He was living in a little small flat in the North End Road, and I used to visit him sometimes, and he was quite determined. He turned things down. He turned down theatre, saying no until I get a film. Well, of course, until If came out, he wasn't likely to get anything. But it was Figures in a Landscape, the Joseph Losey film, which did come up, and that was him and Robert Shaw. And everything changed from then on. So he was proved right. But I never wanted that particularly. I didn't want to, I don't know, I just wanted to work, I suppose, and to me, and if I was lucky enough to be offered things, and the fact that I was writing as well, it was all very varied. So I wasn't envious. I was. The one thing that Richard Warwick, who was the third one of us in If, he was a lovely man, and he and I were a bit miffed because when the Cannes Film Festival came up and If was entered and indeed won the Gold Door that year, Malcolm was taken over there, but Richard and I weren't, and we still felt very much as though we were part of a trio. And so we were a bit miffed that we weren't invited. I'm sure it was a financial thing apart from anything else. But Malcolm, he was undoubtedly the star. He knew he was, and throughout the filming, he behaved as though he was in many ways. And I never resented that at all. We were just different people. But last time we met, which was a year or two ago, he came over to do some promotion for Clockwork Orange's 50th anniversary. And it was lovely. These two rebellious schoolboys from If ended up having a cream tea at the Dorchester. And I remember thinking there's an irony in this. And anyway, we had a photo taken,
Oh, sorry. So you had a photo taken. That sounds quite a nice moment. You obviously worked with Malcolm on 80s High, and that's.
Well, that's right. That's right. And that was 7 years later. And by then, of course, he was quite a well-known star. And yes, the story then was, of course, that on the first day of shooting, we arrived, and I was sharing a caravan with Peter Firth, and we weren't called. We thought we were going to be called, but they said no, there was a delay. And they said the delay was because Malcolm had arrived and had gone into his caravan, and there wasn't a fridge. And in his contract, it said that there was a fridge in his caravan, and he said he wouldn't work until the fridge arrived. And indeed, that's what happened. And so filming didn't start until the afternoon. So yeah, that, you know, he was the star, but he's a lovely man, and I
Oh, so I just missed that last bit, David. You just paused. You were saying that Malcolm was a lovely man, then it paused. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you just froze there a second ago. The last thing I heard, you said that Malcolm was a lovely man, and then I don't know if you said anything after
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say any more.
No,
No,
that was it.
I'm
That was perfect.
very fond of him, and he wrote a foreword for my little book.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
We will always be brothers. We
Yeah.
don't see each other much, but we'll always be brothers. And Richard Warwick died sadly, about 20 years ago, as indeed did Christine Noonan. So, and Robert Swan, who played Roundtree, the head prefect, he went some years ago. So Malcolm and I are hanging on in there.
Did you have anything much to do with Christopher Plummer on Aces High?
Sorry, any?
Did you have anything to do with Christopher Plummer on Aces High?
He was a lovely man. I had a couple of conversations. What really impressed me about him was that there's a scene where Malcolm has captured a German pilot, and we bring him back and we give him a sort of celebratory thing where we're all going round, and there's a big rumpus fight type thing. And during the whole of it, Christopher Plummer's calm character is sitting there playing the piano. And what impressed me was the fact that he really was playing the piano, and on the soundtrack it is actually him playing the piano, because he could have been a concert pianist, and it was only at the last minute, I think, that he chickened out of that and became an actor, but he played the piano very, very well.
That's lovely. Ian did say it was Tony Vogel who was your sidekick in the New Avengers.
Oh right, thank you very much. Tony Vogel. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for joining us and spending so much time talking about your career and obviously the New Avengers. And obviously, thank you for staying with us for so long. We deeply appreciate it. Is there any final comments you'd like to make, Dave, before we go?
No, I'm fascinated by this. I'm very interested in the fact that you do this, and I think it's great. And maybe the pandemic has encouraged more of this kind of thing. And I've done a couple of film festivals which have had to go online rather than for real. And to be honest, it makes life much easier than actually going to the event somewhere away. And when I was doing my little book, a lot of cinemas, particularly independent cinemas, did a screening of IF, and I would go along and talk about it afterwards and answer questions, and hopefully sell a few copies of the book. And that I thoroughly enjoyed. But in the last year, I've done 2 or 3 of those things actually online, and they've been just as interesting, because the question if there is a fan club, not a fan club officially, but I mean there are fanatics out there, and they know the film far better than I do, and they would come up to me sometimes and give me a line, and I'd say what, and they say, come on, your turn, and they wanted to do a scene with me because they knew all the dialogue. Extraordinary and very gratifying. I mean, something you've done more than that now, 52 years ago, is still looked upon. I mean, it still gets voted in as much the top 10 British films of all time in some of the lists, and that's, to have been part of that is really extraordinary. Very, very fortunate.
Quite something, definitely. Do you get much fan mail about the New Avengers? Do you find people recognise you for it, or
no? Not really. No, occasionally. No, I get some nice emails via the website for all sorts of things, but they tend, funnily enough, they tend to be more to do with my children's theatre world. I mean, I had one 2 days ago from, she was an actress who has become a teacher.
Yeah.
And she was in one of my plays when she was 11, which was 35 years ago or something. And she wants to do that play with the children that she's now teaching. And it's lovely. I mean, that brings back all sorts of memories and of that particular play. And actually published 2 days ago was a new anthology of my plays, which Bloomsbury, Methuen published, and there are 5 plays which are being suggested for children to actually do. I wrote them for professional actors to perform for children. But they seem to think now that they want the children to have a look at them. And again, it's a new anthology, but in fact, if I'm honest, all the plays were written more than 25 years ago, but they've sort of come back. And there's a play called The Seesaw Tree, which is about a tree which is in danger of being chopped down, seen from the point of view of the animals and creatures that live on it. And I wrote that 30 odd years ago, and suddenly it's become terribly relevant again because of the HS2 thing, the trees being chopped down. And I've just written a storybook version, which is going to be published next year. But the play, the last time it was done in a major production was in China, in Beijing, the China National Theatre for Children. Marvelous production directed by an assistant of mine who went out to do it. And I was able to see it. And it's what is really gratifying in this business, if you have something which has lived a long time and people remember with affection. And I believe with my children's writing that if I'd been an adult playwright, it was very unlikely that a play that I wrote 30 or 40 years ago would still be remembered now, because the mores would have changed and the day would change. But with children's things, it's slightly different. The things don't date quite so much. And particularly in a fantasy world with animals or whatever it may be. And so I feel very blessed with doing that, because early on, of course, working for children, you were very much in the second or third division. And a lot of people couldn't understand why you were working for children. Whereas for me, it was the most important thing in the world. And I got more of a buzz out of watching children watching my shows, if they were going well, than anything else. And I still find a live audience of children responding positively to a show the most exciting thing in my life, really.
Well, I suppose there might be the toughest audience, because as adults they would very politely clap if they didn't like it, but children will soon let you know whether they like it or not. So
absolutely right.
Did I read in your website you also do magic? Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that was one of the first things I did. And I was an only child, and that was one of the hobbies that you could do on your own, and you could show things to people or whatever, but you didn't have to do it in pairs, as it were. And I started doing magic at children's parties when I was 12. And then when I was about 13 or 14, I formed a double act. And we used to go around with a local dance band singing songs and me doing magic. Must have been awful, must have been terrible. But that continued. And when I started doing television, doing Play Away, for instance, a lot of my colleagues on that, Brian Cant and Tony Arthur, Derek Griffiths, they were doing one-man shows in theatres, using their television fame, as it were. And I thought, well, maybe I could have a go at that. And so I ended up doing the David Wood Magic and Music Show, which I did for years, 25 years or so, in theatres all over the country, at weekends particularly. And that enabled me to do the magic. And during the course of it all, I became a member of the Magic Circle, and then I got promoted to the Inner Magic Circle with Gold Star for my services to children's magic. No, it was also a very useful thing, because with my children's shows, I would very often put magic into it, so that magic would be part of the story, and I would either myself or bring an illusionist in who would actually do these magical things on stage, which children enjoyed, particularly if they were part of the story. So that side of things has been very important. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely wonderful. I just wanted to read you a couple of thank yous we've had from the audience. Jan says, thanks for a great evening. And Paul has said, thank you so much for a wonderful evening, David and Philip. So enjoyable, wonderful stories, a fantastic evening. I think we'd agree on that one.
That's very kind of everybody. Thank you.
But we've so much enjoyed you being with us tonight, David. A wonderful way to spend a Saturday evening. Thank you for all your memories and your wonderful stories and all the wonderful things that we've covered. I wish you good luck with obviously your anthologies and the tiger that came to. Is it came to tea? Is that it?
Yeah, the Tiger Who Came to Tea. Yeah, with luck, I shall be directing it again at the end of June. If the roadmap is adhered to, we will see. and it will open at the Haymarket Theatre in London on the 12th of July for very young children.
That sounds very good indeed. I recommend everybody checks out your website. I think it's davidwood.org.uk, or anyway, if people Google David Wood,
Google David Wood actor and it comes up all right. There are lots of David Woods. There's an evangelical preacher in America who steals my thunder from time to time, but you can find me. But thank you all very much for listening. It's been a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. It's been wonderful. Good luck with everything, and thanks again for your wonderful time this evening.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, David.